right, well, let's continue on, and we're going to go to part 2 on the Mormonism article that we got, Corruptions of Christianity and Mormonism. And if you want to follow along, you can go to creationliberty.com, just type in the word Mormon, and you'll find the article. Or if you're listening by YouTube, you can click the link in the description, and that'll take you to where you can follow along. So last week we were quoting a bunch of the prophets and presidents, because if you're a president of the LDS, that's the Latter-day Saints Church, if you're a president of that, then you're also considered a prophet. And we quoted their prophets, their own LDS prophets, who said that you need to examine the teachings of Joseph Smith to see and put them to the test to make sure whether they're true or not, which most Mormons are not willing to do because the LDS Church really indoctrinates them to not actually examine them. And then we went through an overview of Mormon beliefs where we talked about how they believe that there are countless gods in the universe. And one of the quotations I didn't read last week was from Joseph Fielding Smith, who is their 10th president of the LDS Church, one of their prophets, who said, quote, Joseph Smith, the prophet, taught a plurality of gods, and moreover that man, by obeying the commandments of God and keeping the whole of the law, will eventually reach the power and exaltation by which he also will become a god, end quote. So they believe that they can become gods. They believe there are countless gods in the universe. And they believe that Elohim, God, was a created God. He was also born to parents. And that Jesus and Lucifer, they're brothers of Elohim. And then they also believe that Adam never sinned. They believe that he was in sinless perfection. And when we get to the ex-Mormon testimonies, I don't write about this too much. When we get to the ex-Mormon testimonies, you're going to see that Brigham Young even stated that Adam is God. And even that very statement, when that was actually brought forth and made known publicly, when there's been some ex-Mormons who have brought that forth, there have been tens of thousands of people leave the Mormon church after understanding that they said that Adam was God. And they also believe that God, this Elohim, lives on a planet or a star named Kolob, and that he came down in a physical body and had physical sex with Mary, which means they do not believe in a virgin birth. They don't believe in any of that prophecy. They believe that Jesus had children, that he married multiple wives, that at Cana in Galilee, right, that he was actually the one that got married, not anybody else. He got married and to no less than 3 women, and then had multiple wives and children with them. This is all Mormon belief. And they believe that Mormons, true Mormons, are descended from the offspring of Jesus Christ. Like the physical offspring, that's what they believe, okay? So, we started last week in talking about the introduction to Joseph Smith. They believe that the Book of Mormon is the most remarkable and important religious text that's ever been given to the world. And we were starting to talk about some of the history of Joseph Smith and that he was a diviner who would use what he called a seer stone to try to divine, use fortune-telling to gain secret and hidden knowledge, and using occult or supernatural means to gain hidden knowledge. That's what divination is. And so he was... we were reading some testimonies last week. We ended on that. Now let's read a little bit more testimony about his money digging and his divination that he was doing. And this is a friend of his family, because Joseph Smith's family, some of his family was actually involved in this money digging business, okay? And Willard Chase, who was a friend of their family, gave his testimony, in which he said, quote, I became acquainted with the Smith family in the year 1820. At that time, they were engaged in the money digging business, end quote. So it's not just me saying this, I'm saying there's testimony that's saying this is what's happening. Alva Hale, who's Joseph Smith's brother-in-law, gave his testimony about the money-digging expeditions they were doing, and this was long before Joseph Smith claimed to have, he even found these golden plates and claimed to translate them and all this stuff, okay? So this is from a book called Joseph Smith and the Origins of the Book of Mormon. Alva Hale's quoted in here saying, quote, Joe Smith never handled one shovel of earth in those diggings. All that Smith did was to peep with stone and hat and give directions where and how to dig, and when and where the enchantment moved the treasure. If that Smith said if he should work with his hands at digging there, he would lose the power to see with the stone, end quote. What a coincidence. That it's not only that he doesn't have to do any work, he can't do any work. No. To actually break a sweat would cause him to lose his power. Well, just quoting from Deuteronomy, if we go back to Deuteronomy chapter 18, starting in verse 10, it says, "There shall not be found among you any one that maketh his son or daughter to pass through fire," which what they were doing was taking their newborn babies and throwing them through the fire as a sacrifice to gods like Moloch and things like that, "or that useth divination," which is what Joseph Smith was doing, "or an observer of times, or an enchanter," which is what Joseph Smith was doing, "or a witch," which is what Joseph Smith was doing, "or a charmer or a consulter with familiar spirits," which is what Joseph Smith was doing, "or a wizard or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. And because of these abominations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee." Now, God's attitude towards witchcraft has never changed. This is, it's been like this in every dispensation, that God has always... He's always hated the wickedness of the pagans and the heathen and the witches and the things that they do. But yet today, people do the traditions of witches all the time and they could care less. Thinking, no, we're going to take their traditions and we're going to do it for Jesus. Like the Kirk Cameron style of things, right? We talked about that when we did the part 6 on Christmas. If you want to go back and you just type in the word Christmas at creationliberty.com, you can go back and you can read more about that, or at least when I'm talking about the popular, in quotations, popular Christian icons. And so in Ezekiel chapter 13, which, we just read in our first half, in verse 6 it says, "They have seen vanity and lying divination, saying, The Lord saith, and the Lord hath not sent them, and they have made others to hope that they would confirm the word." Okay, so you have vanity and lying divination. This is precisely what Joseph Smith is doing. And then he's going, they have made others to hope that they would confirm the word. So other people have said, "Oh, we're putting our faith in Joseph Smith, that he's given us the truth." And we're going to see more of this later as we get into Mormonism, because that's what they believe. They believe Joseph Smith has given them the revelation and has finished out the Bible for them. See, these are the others that hope that they would confirm the word. That they, who's the they? That's the false prophets, the lying diviners, just like Joseph Smith. So here's a quotation from another man who knew the Smiths personally. He gives a much more detailed account, and this is again from Joseph Smith in the Origins of the Book of Mormon, which says, quote, "The family of Smiths held Joseph Jr. in high estimation on account of some supernatural power which he was supposed to possess." By the way, again, that's divination, which the Bible condemns as abomination in the sight of God. He continues, he says, "This power he pretended to have received through the medium of a stone of peculiar quality. The stone was placed in a hat in such a manner as to exclude all light except that which emanated from the stone itself. This light of the stone, he pretended, enabled him to see anything he wished." So again, pure divination. Accordingly, he discovered ghosts, infernal spirits, mountains of gold and silver, and many other invaluable treasures deposited in the earth. Now, this doesn't mean he actually found them. That means he sees them in a vision. Okay? He would often tell his neighbors of his wonderful discoveries and urge them to embark in the money-digging business. Luxury and wealth were to be given to all who would adhere to his counsel. I will mention one circumstance. The sapient Joseph discovered northwest of my house a chest of gold watches, but as they were in the possession of an evil spirit, it required skill and stratagem to attain them. Accordingly, orders were given to stick a parcel of large stakes in the ground, several rods around in a circular form, over the spot where the treasures were deposited. Samuel F. Lawrence, with a drawn sword in his hand, marched around to guard any assault which his satanic majesty might be disposed to make. Meantime, the rest of the company were busily employed in digging for the watches. They worked as usual till quite exhausted, but in spite of their defender, Lawrence, and their bulwark of stakes, the devil came off victorious and carried away the watches." End quote. So, and again, Joseph Smith didn't lift a finger to actually do any work himself. No. He is the diviner. He gets to tell everybody what to do. And of course, when they're digging and digging, and he can tell they're getting frustrated, oh, somebody must have... all he has to do is really come out in that situation and say, oh, you didn't stand guard right in this place. You did, or maybe somebody fell asleep or something. Because you fell asleep, the devil went off with the watches, and now we can't get anything. So what's it going to do? It's going to take the heat off of Joseph Smith and put it onto this guy who was supposedly keeping guard, because Joseph Smith can't do any work himself, right? Welcome to Mormonism, because that's exactly what we're going to see pretty soon. So if we go back into Acts 16, I want to read this to you, because there was, starting in verse 16, it says, and it came to pass, as we went to prayer, a certain damsel possessed with a spirit of divination met us, which brought her masters much gain by her soothsaying. Now this is a woman who actually was possessed of a devil, who was, because you have to stop and consider, Joseph Smith is just he's lying divination. He's not possessed with, I'm sure he was possessed with a spirit, but that spirit was not giving him any divination. He was making this stuff up. But this woman in the Bible actually possessed a spirit of divination, and her masters were gaining profit from her soothsaying. And then it continues, it says, the same followed Paul and us. So she was following them, and cried, saying, these men are the servants of the Most High God, which show unto us the way of salvation. Now, are they the servants of God, which show the way of salvation? Yeah, they were. And this did she many days. But it's interesting, because watch what Paul does here. Does he turn around and say, woman, you are telling the truth? Praise God. No. But Paul, being grieved, turned and said to the spirit, I command thee in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And he came out the same hour. And when her master saw that the hope of their gains was gone, they caught Paul and Silas, and drew them into the marketplace unto the rulers, and brought them to the magistrates, saying, these men, being Jews, do exceedingly trouble our city. Oh, they are these Jews that have come in here, they have just done untold nasty things to us. Why? Because they're taking the evil out from among them. They can't make money off these devils anymore. But Paul turned out and rebuked the spirit that was within her, even though what came out of her mouth was actually true. It doesn't matter. The devil in her was seeking to lure people, because what would happen? She would go along and tell this. These people would see that it was true, and then when Paul and the others left that area and moved on, people would come to her and ask her for the truth. You see how this is going to cause a problem? Because people were going to come into her and say, oh, you were right about this. Well, let's go on to you and let's see what other truths we can learn from you. And then they're going to start learning from devils. The whole thing, the spirit of the devil that was in her was seeking to manipulate other people away from them in the end. That's what all that was about. And that's why Paul was grieved at this. So anyway, Joseph Smith was a lying diviner. We ought to have enough sense in our heads. Even if you're a new Christian and may not understand, being able to command a spirit to come out of somebody like that, you can understand when somebody is a lying divination. That ought to be something very simple that we can handle. Now, apparently Smith definitely wasn't as skilled in his witchcraft as this damsel was, because he was found guilty of fraud by the state of New York. He was accused of being what they called him in legal documents as the glass looker. And I have an image on here. This is a screenshot. Somebody had scanned the actual document, and I wrote on the site here what it says. It says same, which means the people, because it was referred to referentially as the people verses. So it's the people versus Joseph Smith the glass looker on March 20th, 1826. Okay, and this was 4 years before he started claimed to have found these golden plates and translated them and started the Mormonism and all that. Okay, I believe if I have the dates right, I believe is when he was this is when he was 13. He was brought into court. When he was 14, he claimed he had a vision from an angel. Right, all this was happening before any of that took place. So you need to keep that in mind. All right, and again, all the references for this stuff, they're on the website. You can go check it out. Go check out the references yourselves. Okay. And if you want to read the full account of it, I have a link that you can click in here where I have a book called A Religious Encyclopedia, Volume 3, which goes over and it gives the full description of this. I'll read you a little bit of it. I'm not going to go through and read the whole thing. But this says, the people of the state of New York versus Joseph Smith, warrant issued upon oath of Peter G. Bridgman, who informed that one Joseph Smith of Bainbridge was a disorderly person and an impostor. Prisoner, that's referring to Joseph Smith when they say prisoner. Prisoner brought into court March 20th, 1826. Prisoner examined, says that he came from town of Palmyra, which is, that's, you know, that they, you can know they're definitely talking about the Joseph Smith of Mormonism there, and had been at the house of Josiah Stull, in Bainbridge most of the time since had small part of time been employed in looking for mines, but the major part had been employed by said Stull on his farm and going to school. Why is he being employed on a farm because here's the question that kind of an obvious thing, really. If Joseph Smith was really finding all this treasure, why didn't he wait until he divined a huge amount of treasure and go dig it up himself? They said, well, he would lose his power. Okay, I'll trade the power for the treasure. And then he could just sit and live the rest of his life in wealth. Well, he could have done that, right? But that's not what he's doing because he's a fraud. And so he's been living on this guy's farm and going to school. He's been working part-time on this farm to try to earn a living. That he said he had a certain stone which he had occasionally looked at to determine where hidden treasures in the bowels of the earth were, that he professed to tell in this manner where the gold mines were a distance underground, and had looked for Mr. Stull several times and informed him where he could find those treasures, and Mr. Stull had been engaged in digging for them. That at Palmyra he pretended to tell by looking at this stone where coined money was buried in Pennsylvania, and while at Palmyra he had frequently ascertained in that way where lost property was of various kinds. That he had occasionally been in the habit of looking through the stone to find lost property for 3 years, but of late had pretty much given it up on account its injuring his health, especially his eyes, made them sore. That he did not solicit business of any kind, and had always rather declined having anything to do with the business. This is what he's claiming. But if you go on to read, you can go on to read this himself. Basically, what's going to come next is all the testimonies of people that are going to say, no, what he's claiming there is not true, that he didn't solicit this business and that he's pretending he didn't have anything to do with it. Yeah, he's been coming to these people and telling them these things. And so he's been doing this thing of using the seer stone and looking into a hat, okay? This is total witchcraft, and we're going to see more evidence of this. We're going to connect all this together in just a little bit. But anyway, let's look at this from the Joseph Smith Bainbridge, New York Court Trials, this book, which says, quote, "The peepstone story can no longer be set aside as a vicious story circulated by those who wish to persecute the budding prophet," that means Joseph Smith. And what he's saying here is that what Mormons will do is when this information was coming forward and people were saying, here's what he was doing this years before he ever even claimed to have a vision of this Moroni angel, right? And when this information was coming forward, people were saying, no, they're attacking the Mormon church. They're persecuting us by this false information. And he's saying, you can't just say that this is false information anymore. There's too much documentation that's been, all this is documented. Go check this out for yourself. I've got the references on here. He said, and he continues and says, for this new evidence dating 4 years before he founded his church, witnesses incontrovertibly to Joseph's early glass-looking activities, end quote. So this kind of seer stone and glass-looking activities, this is pure witchcraft. So he was a young sorcerer trying and failing to use occultic powers in search for wealth. He got convicted of fraud by the state of New York, and then a few years later comes out to tell everyone he's a prophet chosen by God to give a new revelation of Jesus Christ that he found out in the woods on golden plates without any evidence of his claims whatsoever. Are you just going to take the guy's word for it? Well, there's a lot of people who have. And there's a lot of people, it's sad they've been led astray. They're putting their faith into men. And that's what I was talking about even in our first half. We were going over that, talking about Jeremiah 17:5, where the thus saith the Lord, cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, whose heart departeth from the Lord. See, the people that put their trust in men, their heart have departed from the Lord, okay? So when you see these people out here, when they go to these pastors, and whatever their pastors say has to be right, you can show them. I mean, folks, this has happened numerous times where I've showed people what this pastor just said was the opposite of what the Bible says, and I can show them word for word what it was. And have these people, basically says, oh, well, I'll have to look into that later, and then you never hear from them again because they don't want to look into it. You see, their heart has departed from God because they put their trust into this priest, basically. It's not really a pastor. They're putting their trust in priests because the priest will tell me how to get to heaven. The priest, I give him money, and then I will get a ticket into heaven. That's the attitude with which they approach it. Nobody says that out loud, but that's the attitude with which they approach it. And that's precisely the attitude which people approach Joseph Smith even today. In Psalm 118:8 it says, "It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man." So let's go over the secrets of these golden plates that Joseph Smith said he found. Okay, now I want to first start out by reading a testimony from Lucy Smith. That's Joseph Smith's mother. She gave an account of what she said happened, the story that she was told by Joseph. And this is from a book called Biographical Sketches of Joseph Smith the Prophet, which says, quote, "The plates were secreted about 3 miles from home. Joseph, on coming to them, took them from their secret place and, wrapping them in his linen frock," which was an outer coating of linen, so he basically made a linen bag out of this stuff, "placed them under his arm and started for home." Now, I want you to remember that. She said he told her he placed them under his arm, kind of like a football. Okay? That's what he claimed to have done. After proceeding a short distance, he thought it would be more safe to leave the road and go through the woods. Traveling some distance after he left the road, he came to a large windfall, and as he was jumping over a log, a man sprang up from behind it and gave him a heavy blow with a gun. Joseph turned around and knocked him down, then ran at the top of his speed. At about half a mile further, he was attacked again in the same manner as before. He knocked this man down in like manner as the former, and ran on again, and before he reached home, he was assaulted the third time." End quote. So now Joseph claimed to have run at nearly 3 miles at the top of his speed. Now, I used to run cross-country meets in high school. Cross-country meets are approximately 3.1 miles. And I can tell you from first-hand experience, even under regular training, it will wear you out to do that. And running at the top of your speed, you can't. You have to pace yourself. You can't just run full blast like that. But Joseph was allegedly able to run this entire 3-mile distance at the top of his speed, but he was also able to knock down 3 men who were attacking him in the process, because they actually were striking him and beating him with the butt of a gun, and he still fought them off and ran at the top of his speed, all without any evidence of this or eyewitnesses to these events. And this is going to get, some of you might be saying, okay, this is totally absurd. Oh, we haven't even begun the absurdity yet. We're going to get there. I've got more to add. Next, I want to look at the testimony of Joseph's brother William, and I got this from a book called The Eyewitnesses History of the Church. Okay, in which he said, quote, "I was permitted to lift them." He's referring to the golden plates, because Joseph brought these golden plates in for them, but nobody was allowed to look at them. They were in a linen bag, and they were allowed to lift them, but they weren't allowed to look at them, right? Because he said, well, God's gonna kill you. He'll kill you if you look upon them. Okay, and so nobody would look upon them. And he said, "I was permitted to lift them as they laid in a pillowcase, but not to see them, as it was contrary to the commands he had received. They weighed about 60 pounds, according to the best of my judgment." End quote. So, let's recap this one more time. Joseph claimed to have run nearly 3 miles at the top of his speed while taking hits, knocking down 3 men, all with 60 pounds of gold under one arm. Now, there's a guy by the name of Ed Robertson. I can't remember. He was some musician in some famous wicked rock band of some sort. I can't remember what, but he got it because he has a bunch of money and he's a pilot. He's got his own private plane, so they gave him a TV show, And you got a bunch of money and not enough time in your hands, they'll give you a TV show, I guess. That's the way it seems to be anymore. But they gave him a TV show where he goes around, and based on what I saw in this, he was going to some interesting places, And one of the places he went to was a gold mine. And what they did is they gave him a challenge. I have a video of it on the website if you want to go on and watch that. Now, again, I have to tell people there's a number of videos that we have on our website that you cannot find on YouTube. And that's because I actually make them as what YouTube gives you the option to make them unlisted. I don't just put them out there for people to watch on a regular basis because I want to make sure that I avoid any copyright issues. So all I'm doing is uploading them for the purpose of putting them on the website in the context in which they're seen. So if you want to see some of these videos, you need to go onto the article, onto the website. I know a lot of our listeners out there just listen to the audios, but you need to go on the website to check out these videos, and you can watch him try to do this. But they gave him a challenge. They had this big iron rolling tray out, and they put down a gold bar that weighed 60 pounds. And they put it about 20 feet from this garage entrance that they had to this place that they're at. It was like a loading dock kind of thing. And they gave him a challenge that they give to about everybody that visits them. They said, this is a gold bar. And the gold bar, I forget how much it was. It was like $250,000, something like that. Gold bar that's sitting there. And they said, if you can pick this up with one hand and walk out that door with it, it's yours. We'll give it to you. And so he tries for about 2 minutes on here to pick this thing up in any way. He can't even lift it off of the tray that it's sitting on. Let alone carry it. He can't even lift it off of there. And Ed, during this thing, said, quote, I'm guessing it can't be done or you wouldn't have offered it to me, end quote. The manager said, you can hear him very quietly in the background. He says, quote, hasn't been done yet, end quote. Nobody has been able, and these are workers who have been working in these mines. They can't even pick this thing up. But Joseph Smith claimed he picked up 60 pounds of gold and put it under one arm. Well, how is it that he was able to do it and no one else has been able to do it? Now, of course, I know what the Mormons are going to tell you. They're going to say that their Elohim, I put in quotations, because that is not the Lord God. That is not the Jesus Christ of the Bible. Their Elohim is a false pagan god, okay? That they're trying to give as one of the names of God they're giving to him, but that's not. It's a false pagan idol they're worshiping. But they believe their Elohim gave Joseph the power to do these things. But there's a number of problems with that explanation. Number one, Smith never claimed to have power from God for that task. Ever. Number two, it doesn't match the testimonies. And number three, there are no eyewitnesses to the event. None. And I even give a picture on here. It shows that this is a museum that has a replica of plates. They said this is roughly what the plates would have looked like. Here's the size of what they would have been with roughly a 60-pound estimated weight. And Martin Harris, he's one of the people who claimed to have seen the plates, but he didn't actually see them himself. He says he saw them in a vision. Okay, and we'll talk more about Martin Harris later. He's one of the more famous ones that you'll probably recognize his name when you hear it. But he said, quote, while at Mr. Smith's, I hefted those plates. I knew from the heft that they were lead or gold, end quote. So he knew that they were lead or gold. His brother said they weighed about 60 pounds, and this is what even, the LDS Church will confess that this is what these things are what the eyewitness accounts had testified of. So Christ and his apostles healing the sick, that was a miracle that was wrought in God. Okay? But the difference between what Joseph Smith is doing and what's stated in Scripture is that what's stated in Scripture is claimed to be the healing power of God. And there were many eyewitnesses to the event. There are thousands of eyewitnesses to a bunch of different miracle healings of Jesus Christ. There were hundreds of people that saw Christ after he raised himself from the dead. But there are no eyewitness accounts to seeing the actual gold plates, nor to Joseph's cross-country strong-arm football story. And you're thinking, okay, this is getting really absurd. No, it's going to get more absurd. Watch this. Joseph Smith, and this is from the LDS Church's own records, okay, and this is from the teachings of President of the Church, Joseph Smith, from an article they had from the LDS Church called The Life and Ministry of Joseph Smith. This is what they said, quote, evidence of the prophet's extraordinary character emerged early in his life. The Smiths were living in West Lebanon, New Hampshire, when a deadly epidemic of typhoid fever attacked many in the community, including all the Smith children. While the other children recovered without complication, Joseph, who was about 7 years old, developed a serious infection in his left leg. Dr. Nathan Smith of Dartmouth Medical School at nearby Hanover, New Hampshire, agreed to perform a new surgical procedure to try to save the boy's leg. Now, this is a really bad situation. It's terrible, especially a young boy, 7 years old, having to go through this. Is really, really bad stuff. And it continues and says, as Dr. Smith and his colleagues prepared to operate, Joseph asked his mother to leave the room so she would not have to witness his suffering. Refusing liquor or to dull the pain and relying only on his father's reassuring embrace, Joseph bravely endured as the surgeon bore into and chipped away part of his leg bone. Do we have to read all this? That gives me the... Now, of course, do we know for certain that this entire story is true as it's being listed out here? Because the LDS Church is only going to post things that make Joseph Smith look really good in the eyes of the public, right? I don't know, but let's assume that it is. Okay? Let's just take their word for it for the time being. It finishes off to say, the surgery was successful, although Joseph walked the next several years with crutches and showed signs of a slight limp the rest of his life. End quote. Let's recap this one more time. You've got Joseph Smith running at full speed for 3 miles. He's taking hits and knocking down attackers as he runs, all the while claiming to carry an impossible to carry 60 pounds of gold under one of his arms, and he's running on an injured leg from his childhood. And all this is coming from a man who is already known to be a fraud in divining for hidden treasure. Just let that sink in for a second. This is the person they're trusting in for their profit. As 2 Timothy 3:13 says, but evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. So all these gold plates, along with this entire story that I've told you, this is from LDS documentation, okay? And all the story I've just told you are the foundation for the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith is now going to attempt to translate these alleged golden plates that he said he found. So from this book called Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, it says, quote, Brigham Young University historian Martin S. Hill has observed, now, most historians, Mormon or not, who work with the sources, accept as fact Joseph Smith's career as village magician, end quote. So this is even... Mormon historians are saying, yes, he was considered a village magician. Yes, he was doing these things. The historians are actually, there are some that are willing to admit, yes, this is the case, because this is what's documented. So despite what any Mormon, and I realize there's no Mormon that's actually going to listen. They're not even going to listen to part 1, let alone part 2. But if they want to believe that these things are not true about Joseph Smith, you are welcome to your beliefs. What you decide to believe does not affect me. I'm not responsible for what you believe. I'm simply responsible to tell the truth about these things. The fact is that Joseph Smith, he was involved in what the Bible calls witchcraft, and now he's going to use that witchcraft in his translation process, as we're going to see. Smith's method of translating the golden plates was laid out clearly by David Whitmer, who, by the way, was one of their 3 main chosen prophets who claimed they saw these golden plates in a vision. And we will talk more about David Whitmer later, in a later episode, okay? But he said, in this self-published book he has called An Address to All Believers in Christ, quote, I will now give you a description of the manner in which the Book of Mormon was translated. Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into a hat and put his face into the hat. Oh, does this sound familiar? Isn't this the same exact divination witchcraft that we just described that's an abomination of the Lord God, and that he's doing lying divination out of these things? Yes, he is doing the exact same thing he was doing before. And he put his face into a hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light, and in the darkness of the spiritual light would shine. Thus the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God, and not by any power of man, end quote. So Smith claimed to have discovered different stones with these plates. Now this is something else that people need to understand, because the seer stone in the hat was not the only thing he claimed. And by the way, if he found 2 stones along with these plates, that's even more weight on top of the 60 pounds. I just want to make that clear. And he called them the Urim and Thummim, which he copied from the Bible in Exodus. In Exodus 28, starting verse 29, it says, "And Aaron shall bear the names of the children of Israel in the breastplate of judgment upon his heart, when he goeth in unto the holy place for a memorial before the Lord continually. And thou shalt put in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and the Thummim, and they shall be upon Aaron's heart when he goeth in before the Lord. And Aaron shall bear the judgment of the children of Israel upon his heart before the Lord continually." Now, concerning the Urim and Thummim, the Bible does not make it clear to us what the Urim and Thummim are. There's a lot of people out there, and you go to a lot of websites or anything like that where they talk about this, and they're going to say they're stones. That's a reasonable guess. I actually don't really have a whole lot of argument with that, but they say the Bible says this, and the Bible does not say that. The Bible doesn't specifically say what that they are stones specifically. You go into 1 Samuel 28, in verse 6, it says, "And when Saul inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by the prophets." So apparently, this Urim, whatever it was in this breastplate, is something that God would use to communicate to the high priest of the temple, the person who was in charge. Okay, he was the prophet of God. And outside of that, there's really not much information the Bible gives on this process. And it's really not very relevant to Christians today because we don't need any such thing. Okay, but this was a commandment he gave to Israel for them to do. But because the Bible doesn't give much detail, pagans, and especially Jewish mystics, have jumped on this Urim and Thummim concept in an effort to justify divination and witchcraft. And this is precisely what Joseph Smith was doing as well. So witches refer to this, by the way, as scrying. When they use some device like this or some crystal or something, they use this scrying. And we talk about, and we did this whole teaching, I think a 3-part teaching on video games and witchcraft. Just type in video games or just games into the search bar at creationliberty.com and go through that teaching. We talk about that in just a little bit more detail. So, the seer stones that Smith claimed to have used were the Urim and the Thummim, and they were used on separate occasions for translation. Brigham Roberts, who is a very well-respected Mormon historian in the LDS Church, okay, he investigated the eyewitness accounts and he found the following. And by the way, I have on here a picture image of what he claimed was his seer stone. If you want to look at that again, you got to go to the article on the website and you can look at that for yourself. But Brigham Roberts said, quote, "The seer stone referred to here was a chocolate-colored, somewhat egg-shaped stone which the prophet found while digging a well in a company with his brother Hiram. It possessed the qualities of Urim and Thummim, since by means of it Joseph was able to translate the characters engraven on the plates." End quote. So many Mormons will teach, they believe and they teach this, that the Book of Mormon was translated using the Urim and Thummim, because Joseph Smith said he was commanded by God to translate with those special stones, this Urim and Thummim he claimed to have found. But that's not what happened. Oliver Cowdery, who's another one of the 3 main eyewitnesses who claimed they saw the golden plates in a vision, and again, we're going to talk about him more later, he stated the following, and this is documented in the Latter-day Saints publication, the Latter-day Saints Millennial Star, volume, I think that's what XLIV is, volume 44, I think. And it says, quote, "Day after day I continued, uninterrupted, to write from his mouth, as he translated with the Urim and Thummim, the history or record called the Book of Mormon," end quote. And you see, Mormons will say, see, he translated with the Urim and Thummim. That's what he said he did. But when we look at an interview with Martin Harris, who I just mentioned earlier, he said that Smith used his seer stone. And he said, quote, "He said that the prophet possessed a seer stone by which he was enabled to translate as well as from the Urim and Thummim, and for convenience he then used the seer stone." Martin said further that the seer stone differed in appearance entirely from the Urim and Thummim that was obtained with the plates, end quote. So here you said, Martin Harris said, well, no, he didn't actually use the Urim and Thummim, he used a special seer stone for convenience. Joseph's wife Emma, or at least his first wife, as we will see later, Joseph Smith had up to potentially 47 different wives, but his first wife Emma told her son, quote, "In writing for your father I frequently wrote day after day, often sitting at the table close by him, he sitting with his face buried in his hat with the stone in it." end quote. Not the Urim and Thummim, not the stones, plural, the stone, his seer stone that she was already very familiar with. And he's sitting with his face buried in a hat. Now, there's an image I have on the website here that you're going to see. This is a painting that's come out of the LDS Church, because this is the propaganda machine right here. This is an example of the huge propaganda machine they have, where they have made a painting, and in the painting you can see Joseph Smith. He has the gold plates out, sitting on a table, okay? And he's got his head bent over, and he's just reading from them. And then you have the young, they're all, by the way, young and handsome, strapping young men, because it's, perfectly. And then you've got Martin Harris, who is sitting with a pen and quill, writing down everything that Joseph Smith is telling him. Again, this...
Wait a minute, I thought nobody was supposed to see those plates.
Right, that's what I'm getting to. Because that's why I'm saying this is an example of the propaganda machine. Because if they were actually going to portray this based on the eyewitness accounts and the testimony of everything, all the documentation we have, they should show him with his head in a hat with magical light coming out of the cracks of this hat, and then he's writing these things down. But yeah, no one has seen these plates. But you see, this is the propaganda they give because they know in the public eye this will look good. So, during the first session, Smith and Harris, they produced 116 pages from what Joseph called the Book of Lehi. Now, Harris requested to borrow these 116 pages. And though Smith claimed that he had been instructed by God not to let anyone take them, he allowed Harris to borrow these pages. However, Harris lost the first 116 pages. Now, there's a big thing going around where everybody says, oh, Lucy Harris, she's the one that she was skeptical of Joseph Smith, which, by the way, was true. Lucy Harris was skeptical of Joseph Smith. But there is no documented evidence that says that she hid the pages, okay? This is a thing that's going around, and some people have said there's not a whole lot of evidence to back that up. That is a possibility, but no one knows for sure. And I think a lot of people have taken that from the South Park show, because South Park is very famous now for doing an episode they did on the Mormons. And many, many years ago I saw this, and I gotta tell you, I laughed and laughed and laughed till it hurt, just because of the way they portrayed this. And they really did a fairly accurate job. Not everything was 100% accurate in what they showed, but for the most part they did. And I think they even went on to do a Broadway, it's huge on Broadway, they did a Broadway musical called The Book of Mormon, in which most of it is basically just the story of the creation of the Book of Mormon, and it's so absurd it becomes a hilarious comedy. But anyway, my point in saying all that is I'm not trying to make a big joke spectacle out of this, though you guys are welcome to laugh at some of the things that I'm talking about. I'm trying to what I'm doing is coming from the position to take them seriously for a moment. And taking them seriously, it becomes a total fraud. Anyway, the bottom line is you'll have a bunch of websites and stuff out there that said, oh, Lucy Harris hid these pages. I'm telling you there is not enough documented evidence to make that claim. It is possible, but we don't know for sure. Anyway, the bottom line is he lost the first 116 pages. And so what they're saying is that Lucy Harris hid them on purpose to see if he could reproduce it again. So Smith obviously would have been angry that Martin Harris lost these after he claimed that God told me not to give them to you and you lost them. Okay, so after praying, Smith said he had another revelation. Oh, well, that seems to be something that's very coincidental in the Mormon Church, and we're going to see that evidence of that later. As we see there, every time they come and run into a problem, they say, oh, I just had a revelation, and then something will change. They do this all the time. So Smith had a revelation that he had lost the ability to translate from the Book of Lehi, and now he would have to translate from a different account, and so it would be the same basic story, just worded a little differently. What a coincidence. So, again, most of you would probably have like a deception alert ringing in your heads right now, all these red flags going off in your minds that something is seriously wrong. But it's going to get more absurd than this. Now, if you remember last week, I read you a quotation from, I believe it was from the Book of Mormon, wasn't it? I'd have to go back up and look again. But that Joseph Smith claimed that he translated the Book of Mormon from what he called Reformed Egyptian. Now, not only was Smith using all these occultic divination practices for his translation method, but he was also unable to even recognize the Egyptian language under close examination. He couldn't even understand what Egyptian was. And this is from a book called The Mormon's Own Book, or Mormonism Tried by Its Own Standards. And why? And this is another example where I said I've had to go outside the LDS Church because they won't document this stuff. They don't want their church members to know these things. It says, quote, "The Reverend H. Caswell, an Episcopal clergyman and professor of a college, paid a visit to Nauvoo, the city of the Mormons, to obtain information respecting the people. In the course of the interview with the prophet, he produced an ancient book in a strange language, which excited much interest among the assembled Mormons, who were eager to know its contents. The book was handed to Smith, who, upon examination, pronounced it to be a dictionary of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Mr. Caswell then coolly informed the company that the volume was a Greek psalter," end quote. Now, a Greek psalter is the Psalms in Greek. So not only could Joseph Smith not even recognize Egyptian hieroglyphics, it had been recently shown he didn't understand one word of it. So I can understand somebody not understanding Egyptian because that's, you have to learn specific, there's all sorts of specific study you have to go into to learn that kind of stuff, and it's very difficult from what I hear. However, that's not the point I'm even getting to. Because what they're going to claim, the Mormons are going to say, well, Joseph Smith, he was given the power of God to see these things and translate these things. Okay, well, hold on a second. He couldn't even recognize Egyptian hieroglyphics from Greek. Now, me being somewhat, ignorant of languages, because I was not given a gift of languages in any sense, okay, I can recognize the difference between Greek and Egyptian hieroglyphics, but Joseph Smith couldn't even do that. Now, a papyrus was also found and placed in the Metropolitan Museum of New York, which was later donated to the LDS Church once it was confirmed to be the papyrus that Joseph Smith said he used to translate the Book of Abraham, which is part of the Pearl of Great Price. Now, if you remember, I listed out the order of importance of their books. They have the Book of Mormon, Doctrine of Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, and the King James Bible they shove in the back seat. So the Pearl of Great Price is one of their sacred books, okay? And Joseph Smith said he used this papyrus that they found to translate the Book of Abraham. Now, I want to read you this from a book called The New Mormon Challenge, responding to the latest defenses of a fast-growing movement, in which it says, quote, "An episode that occurred over 30 years ago offered a very rare opportunity to confirm Joseph Smith's God-given translating abilities. In 1967, some of the original papyrus pieces used by Smith to translate the Book of Abraham surfaced in a New York City museum. In what must have been a heartbreaking discovery to many Mormons at the time, modern Egyptologists' translation showed that the documents had nothing whatsoever to do with the biblical patriarch Abraham. The implications for Smith's translating of the Book of Mormon should be obvious. Today, most Mormons deny that the Book of Abraham is a translation in the word's normal sense of the Egyptian papyri," end quote. It had always been taught in the LDS Church that Smith had translated the Pearl of Great Price by this text. Well, at least the Book of Abraham, by this specific text. Okay? That was what was always taught. Once it was discovered to be fraudulent, I guess it was just a coincidence they happened to change their position at the same time. What a coincidence. Now they can simply claim that Smith only used the text as a method to channel the knowledge of his translation. Now, there's some Mormons that might claim that, or that it's just a cipher with hidden messages from God that can only be seen by Joseph Smith. And I've got a picture of the facsimile number 1, because there's multiple parts to this facsimile. This is an image of the first part that they claimed that was translated into the Book of Abraham. So there's Egyptian text attached to this drawing. If you're looking at the website and following along here, you can see this stuff. And Smith claimed it was an account of Abraham. Now I'm going to give you from a book called The Esoteric Codex, Ancient Egyptian Text, Volume 1, and this author is going to explain what this actually says. Quote, "Osiris shall be conveyed into the great pool of Khans, and likewise Osiris born to Tikbet, the justified, after his arms have been placed on his heart, and the breathing permit, which Isis made and has writing on its insides and outsides, has been wrapped in royal linen and placed under his left arm near his heart. The rest of his mummy bandages should be wrapped over it. The man for whom this book has been copied will breathe forever and ever as the Bas. Bas is in Egyptian is like the aspect of the soul. will breathe forever and ever as the boss of the gods do, end quote. So this document has nothing to do with Abraham. It has everything to do with a pagan Egyptian ritual that honors false gods in a burial rite they hoped would gain them eternal life. It has nothing to do with Abraham in the Bible, and it certainly has nothing to do with Mormonism. I'd also like for anybody to tell me when Abraham went into Egypt and he told Abraham, do not take anything from the Egyptians. He says, don't even buy a horse from them. If God sends you into a land and he tells you not even to buy a used car from these people, why is it that you would think that God would take something of his word out of Egypt? I mean, Egypt has all throughout the Bible been a part of the wickedness and a representation of the wickedness of Israel. Over and over it has. So he's claiming that all these good things are coming from now these Egyptian texts, and it has nothing to do with what Joseph Smith claimed it had to do with. And Samuel Mercer, who's a professor and author on many books concerning Egyptian hieroglyphics and history, he said the following, and this comes from the Improvement Area, Volume 16, which was published out of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It says, quote, all the scholars come to the same conclusion, that Smith could not possibly translate any Egyptian text as his interpretations of the facsimiles shows. Any pupil of mine who would show such absolute ignorance of Egyptian as Smith does could not possibly expect to get more than a 0 in an examination in Egyptology, end quote. Again, if any Mormon happens to be listening, by some miracle they're actually still listening to this, and they want to argue that the Book of Abraham was simply revealed to Joseph Smith without the need of the papyrus. The papyrus was just it was just like a cipher, it was just like a guide into the secret text that was in there. Okay, well then you also need to accept Scientology when L. Ron Hubbard claims it was revealed to him. I mean, because what is the difference between L. Ron Hubbard and Joseph Smith at this point? They have nothing to justify their beliefs except the claims. They're just claims of a con artist. That's it. The King James Bible can be verified from tens of thousands of sources in many different languages. Okay? I'm not just talking about the Textus Receptus. There's more outside of it that verifies the King James Bible is true. The only source we have to verify the Pearl of Great Price was written by Joseph Smith is that one papyrus that doesn't have any information that Smith wrote down in his so-called translations. There's no connection between them. So it's interesting that some parts of the phrasing as well, this gets even worse, because the phrasing of the Book of Abraham has a near perfect match to the King James Bible. Now, I'm not going to go through a ton of different examples in here, because I've seen some other websites that have, but I don't think it's, we need to go through example after example. I mean, maybe I'll add that in later or something like that. But the LDS Church claims this proves his translations to be correct. But in reality, that actually conclusively proves Smith made it up. Because you have to understand, these Egyptian papyruses were written thousands of years ago. Well, if you're talking about they're written in BC, before the time of Christ, how is it that they have phrasing in the Book of Abraham that is exactly as the King James Bible, which was written thousands of years later? In a form of English that actually hadn't come into existence yet. Okay? For example, here's an excerpt from the Pearl of Great Price. This is in Abraham 2:20. It says, quote, and I, Abraham, arose from the place of the altar which I had built unto the Lord, and removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, end quote. Well, you see, that's interesting, because Genesis 12:8 says, and he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel. That phrasing is directly taken out of the King James Bible, and removed from thence, it's an English phrase used in a writing style that was popular and really good. That was like the peak of the English language in the 16th century. So this was something that was used in the 1500s and 1600s. How is that found, that specific phrasing found in an Egyptian papyrus thousands of years ago? I mean, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Obviously, Smith is simply quoting the phrasing he was familiar with as he was growing up, learning from the King James Bible in church buildings he was attending. That's the bottom line. And Joseph Smith said to the members of his new religion, this is him from the book History of the Church, Volume 4, Joseph Smith said, quote, "I told the brethren that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth and the keystone of our religion, and a man would get nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than any other book," end quote. The Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book. We're already seeing where the things that he's saying and doing, he is making this stuff up, and that he's already a fraud that's been using witchcraft divination to come to all this, and now he wants to claim the Book of Mormon is the most perfect book? Well, as we will see, as we're going to come to next week, so I think we're going to close there, you'll see that in the Bible there are thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of archaeological evidence that are verifying every aspect of the Bible, and the history of the Bible is accurate. But what we're going to find starting next week, we're going to go into the archaeology versus the Book of Mormon, and we're going to see that not one piece of archaeological evidence has ever been found to support the Book of Mormon, and that's where we'll start up next week. So did anybody have any questions or comments about anything we talked about today before we close?
I have a question.
Yeah.
With all the evidence, I guess, showing the falsehood of Mormonism, have you ever spoken to a Mormon that has admitted to all of that?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not that is admitted to it. I've spoken to Mormons, but they generally, I mean, they're always very kind. They're very courteous. They nod their heads at things, but they really just ignore it. And we're going to, when we get into the final parts of the teaching where I get into some of the ex-Mormon testimonies, you can see for yourself why. And I've actually published some of those ex-Mormon testimonies in full length at the bottom where you can actually watch the video of people, them talk about this stuff. So, okay, any other questions or comments before we close? All right, well, thanks for joining us, everybody, this week, and may our Lord Jesus Christ bless you all as you study His Word and seek to glorify Him in all that you do, and we will see you next week.